Hello and welcome to the Federal. You're watching Off the Beaten Track, a program in which we pick up one single issue and then look at it from various sides. Today we are going to be talking about Assam to a great extent, and in Assam, the biggest polarizing issue, that is the battle between the insider and outsider, not between them so much, but over them. Who would I turn to in such a situation? Best is instead of going to a politician to talk to an academic, that to a historian. So I am going to be speaking with Professor Apurjyoti Saikia, who is a professor in the Humanities Department in the Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Welcome to this program, Professor Saikia, and thank you so much to come and share your views on an issue which has actually been burning for the entirety of my journalistic career, which is right from the early 1980s. Even before that, it has actually been a major issue right from the 70s when the Assam movement started in the second half of the 1970s. Welcome to the program, Professor Saikia.
Thank you so much for bringing me into this program.
I am speaking with you primarily because of what all has been happening in Assam, the politics over that, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's announcement that the government has decided that they are going to be forming a high-powered demographic commission, which actually raises all kinds of alarms in Delhi and amongst people like us because we have elections in Assam in 2026. There are also elections in West Bengal, also another state where the issue of infiltrators taking over the country and reducing the Hindus into a minority, that narrative plays out in a very big way. Now, instead of getting straight away into political rhetoric, I decided to step back a bit from the current noise over infiltrators, whether it is actually true or not. I went back to your book, which came out 2 years ago, The Quest for Modern Assam, A History, 1942 to 2000. It covers almost 6 decades of the history of Assam, the modern history of Assam. Let me try to understand from you that your book, which actually looks at the evolution of Assam, also looks at in a big way the entire issue of migration. Now, for somebody who has studied it academically, how would you strip it of the political rhetoric and introduce our audience, our viewers, to the history of migration in Assam and in other northeast states, or whatever used to be part of the original Assam, which was created in 1947? Can you just explain that to our viewers?
Right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mukhopadhyay. You know, to understand the question of migrations uh, into the British province of Assam, right, it requires a little deeper and serious understanding what exactly happened.
Right.
I would say that broadly, the phenomenon happened in two different centuries.
Okay.
19th century, the second half, and the 20th century for a larger period of the century.
Okay.
Both this pattern and the development related to the inflow of people in different capacities, in different decades, and in different ways. This was it had different kind of outcome,
Mhm.
different kind of background, and different moments. One can, overall, the larger story was a significant flow of population from different directions, primarily from the western part of the British province of Assam.
Right.
Unlike in many other parts of the British India or elsewhere in the Indian subcontinent.
Right.
I would say that in the 19th century, from the 1860s
Hmm.
to the end of the century, of the 19th century, there was a significant flow of workers, primarily to assist the British colonial, uh, the British tea plantations,
Right. In the tea plantations.
right? British tea plantations. This was primarily an assisted flow of people. Right? Most of them came primarily to join uh, as a workforce in the
Mhm.
British owned tea plantations. Many of them came from the poorer regions of British India across eastern parts of northern and also central and to some extent from southern India. To some, I'm talking about the geography, British Indian geography.
British India. So we are not talking about India, Pakistan, Bangladesh at that time. So we are
This
talking about the entire landmass of what was British India,
right,
right from what is Bangladesh today to all the way up to the western fringes of
right.
Pakistan. So we're talking about that. So people went into Assam from everywhere, if I have understood it correctly.
Mostly, there are they were of the poorer classes. They came to work, and large majority of them, in fact, the substantial majority of them, never returned back.
Okay,
Became part of the larger cultural, political, economic structures of the society.
right.
Uh, Along with that flow of the workers, also one can notice others who came, but their numbers were much lower quantitatively compared to this huge, significant flow of the who came to join as a workers. I would say the merchants, right, or those who came to assist the British colonial government
Hmm.
as their staffs, as officials, or other white collar jobs. A significant number of came throughout the 19th century from Bengal, from the larger northwestern part of India,
Hmm.
who joined as a merchant. And they really became an important force in the larger economic, political, and the cultural context, cultural
Right.
landscape of Assam. How many came? Who came? Because in the 19th century, the very foundation of statistical compilations were poor, rudimentary. We do not have a very clear pictures.
Yes. The census also started fairly late.
Much later,
Yeah,
from
much later.
very formally from 1881 for
It,
Assam,
yes.
1872 for Bengal, but
Hmm.
we do get a clear some pictures of it. And so I would say from the different geographies of British India and
Hmm.
also from elsewhere, the people came to join the at a different level, primarily to earn livelihood. I
And this is mainly Assam, not including those parts which were constituted as Assam immediately after
yeah,
1947, which means that parts of other northeastern states and union territories,
right.
not just there.
You were talking largely about the highlands, the hill
Yes,
districts of
Highlands.
British
Exactly.
Assam, so which now mostly constituted as the different states of northeastern part of India, right?
Right.
Most of them came primarily as an agriculturalist, graziers, right, merchants like that, and the settlements were largely in the plains of the Brahmaputra Valley, right?
Right.
Not even in the Barak Valley. Most of them. I would say that obviously they keep on distributing and kept on moving from here and there, right?
It was a
Uh,
very dynamic, human population which kept on moving, like in most other parts of British India at that time.
I would say this was an amazing development, right? The way
Okay.
people were moving from one directions to another in search of jobs, opportunities, livelihood.
There is one question I would like to ask you at this stage. When you said, I was noted that when people came in large numbers from other parts, across various geographies, on the east, from the north, from the south, from the west, came from everywhere. And you said that these people assimilated themselves with the culture of the people there. So, would you say that in the initial decades of this migration and of settlement of people from outside areas or out different geographies, it did not really set up an outsider versus an insider kind of not exactly conflict, but some kind of a dissonance? Did it create then, or it was absolutely accepted by the people who are quote unquote the original residents of the region?
As far as we see in the records of the 19th century, we do not see too much of a tensions, right? If
Mhm.
even if there would have been some kind of very localized trouble, uh, that needs to be seen in a different context. I would
Okay.
say that some very limited amount of tensions, classes, conflicts would primarily take place between the merchants and the local producers.
Right.
This would be primarily for profit, for negotiations, for or betrayal of trust between the producer and the merchants, right?
Right.
But it was a very complex process which was set tentatively from the mid 19th century. The process
Mm.
began a little earlier, but from the mid 19th century, the things obviously took a more formal and structured form. And
Right.
this was also facilitated by the arrival of the new infrastructure of transport. For
Okay.
example, the steamers arrived in, it facilitated the travel into these regions for the merchants from the long distance places and
Right.
others. The distance and the between Calcutta or the interiors of Bengal and the Brahmaputra Valley got reduced because of these new transport infrastructures. By the
Right.
late 19th century and the early 20th century, the construction of the railways also acquired a more speedier form, right? And it definitely helped the people to move in.
Right.
The benefits obviously was of different of it went in different directions, right? Uh,
Mm.
Obviously, local people they also became part of this very complex process, right? But things were not so directly competitive at that time. It was also the questions of per square mile, the population density of primarily of the plains of Assam in the 19th century compared to, for instance, the neighboring Bengal.
Mm.
Bengal, obviously, by the end of the 19th century, it had a much denser population density
That's
compared
right.
to Brahmaputra Valley.
Right.
All these processes, ecological, the economic, and other forces obviously shaped this or created a larger economic environment where people would look for opportunities and things were uh, towards mobility. And this was not unique to Assam at the time. People were moving from northern India to others in different directions of British India,
Right.
even outside of India. Things were happening at that moment.
Right.
It was in the
Let's
yeah,
if I may interrupt you, to ask you a question, to frame what is happening. We are getting a broad sense as to late 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. We do get a sense of what is happening within the region which we now identify as Assam and maybe other some other northeastern states also. But let me also try to bring in the other element that what all is happening in the parts which are adjoining this particular region that we are talking about. In Bengal, there is a major narrative going on about the partition of Bengal. 1905, the British, try to bring in a partition in Bengal, which gets which gets cancelled because of the protest by people. Then the entire issue of partition, Muslim League, religion-based nationalism, emerges in India. Hindu Mahasabha, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh also starts gaining voice in the 1930s and 1940s, till eventually partition becomes inevitable and partition happens within a certain part of India and among certain people of India. There is a very strong sense of the other on the basis of religious identity, and that is the Muslim. So, my direct question is that all these migrations which are happening, is there any academic basis to say that today's politically driven hunt for the Bangladeshi migrant, Bangladeshi Muslim, the Bangladeshi Hindu is a different category, we will speak about it later. Is there any academic basis to say that this politically driven hunt for Bangladeshi illegal infiltrators has any basis or not?
Now, to understand this is a very complex question, very sensitive questions. We need to go back to the early 20th century.
Right,
Without an understanding of the early 20th century,
right.
it's very
My
difficult to
point is very
understand.
different. That's right.
You know, before I move into the early 20th century, let me make it very clear that in the 19th century, despite the significant volume of migration happening, the erstwhile the populations, the people who were already there, right, who have been there for centuries, right, let's say the indigenous populations belonging to different caste, religions, right, they did not really suffer significantly because the economic structures that were introduced in the 19th century, did not really displace the populations,
Right.
except in places where the tea planters and or tea plantations projects came directly in confrontations with the local economy.
Mhm. Okay.
Apart from that, that economic, the confrontations was to a great extent limited. However, in the early 20th century, the things acquired suddenly a different form and different character. And the process was already set in the mid 19th century. Though things began to happen in the Brahmaputra Valley in the early 20th century, or say by the turn of the 19th century, the process began in Bengal, elsewhere in the mid 19th century. It
Mhm.
is essentially around another crop. It is the jute
Mhm.
fiber. As many of us we know this story, the huge transformations of the British industrial landscape, right? This definitely was heavily dependent on the flax and also the jute fiber. Uh, from the mid 19th century, Bengal had witnessed the dramatic increase in the growth of the jute crop. Jute
Right.
to be used as a fiber for packaging and for many other
Many
requirements.
other
Right. Bengal was definitely one of the most important site for the British colonial, amongst the British colonial possessions for the
yes.
production of the jute. And because of this, British India also became the beneficiary of the establishment of jute industry in and around Calcutta by the mid 19th century, and the process continued to increase. Right, and by the early 20th century, the demand for jute and the jute products really got intensified. This also necessitated, since the last decade of the 19th century, that you need to procure new places where jute can be cultivated. By the 1890s, the Bengal jute industrialists, all of them were British, right? They began to pursue, negotiate with the British imperial officials, that we need more places to produce jute. And Brahmaputra Valley, because of its closeness to the Bengal in terms of ecology, in terms
Right.
of economic infrastructures, because of the soil condition, and also the lower presence of populations, farming communities, it seems much more easier. Why one can read quite easily. These are very open archives that from how towards the end of the 19th century, these industrialists and their lobbies, right, they began to pressurize the British officials that it is important that the new areas must be brought under jute cultivations.
Mhm.
And one can see that it was around this time, from 1900 onward, the British imperial government, both in Bengal and in Assam, they undertook series of structural steps to facilitate the productions of cultivation of jute, primarily by the farmers of Bengal, right?
Okay.
Those the farmers of Bengal, most of them were obviously followers of Islam at that time because they were the follow Muslim Bengali Muslim farmers. They were the primary cultivators, right?
Right.
Very poor and small peasants, right? And many of them were also sufferers from the permanent settlement, right? They had an intense conflict and competitions with the Bengal zamindars, right? For
Right.
them, now it is a new opportunity.
And these
And
people were coming from, just to understand that these people who are coming from Bengal, the Muslims that you were saying, these were primarily coming from what is now West Bengal, or what is, then was East Bengal, East Pakistan, and now Bangladesh. Is it, or it is not possible to really know as to which districts were they coming from?
no, the facts are very clear that these are primarily from East Bengal.
Okay.
East Bengal, which means modern Bangladesh.
Yeah.
These were the districts of
But it would
Rangpur.
also include Sylhet, which was very much part of the same region, at that time. Am I
The
not?
farmers of Sylhet, they
Ah,
did not really move in large numbers in terms of, they didn't join the force of jute cultivators, right?
okay.
They,
Okay.
they moved in different, because Sylhet was part of Assam at that time.
Yes.
They moved in terms of, say,
Most people do not know that, today. That's
yes,
the that's the
Sylhet,
irony.
yeah, Sylhet was a district of Assam. It was only in 1947, through a plebiscite, Sylhet decided to formally join with Pakistan. It was
Hmm.
in 1947 in the month of July. Uh, so most of the people who were from Sylhet, they kept on moving from here and as a government servant, as an employees of in different infrastructures or retailers, traders like that. And they were part of the province of Assam. So most of these poor farmers who moved uh, into the riverine, low-lying areas of from of the Brahmaputra Valley, most of them arrived primarily between the decades of 1900 to 1930s. This
Right.
three decade was really important. This was also critical for extraordinary boom in the global jute cultivations. The
Okay.
prices was going up. This was also the time of the First World War. The requirement for jute was very high.
Fire. Yes.
Expansion of jute industry had also acquired new momentum in Bengal at that time. So it was a time of jute at that time.
Right.
The Muslim Bengali farmers from Bengal, they were really, they had set an exemplary example of production of jute, right?
Hmm.
Between 1900 to 1900 and say late 20s, early 30s, right? The process of reclamation of land, primarily with the very clear and clandestine support of the government, the government of Assam, the British government Assam, it really got intensified, right? Uh, Most of these people, for them, it was a very short journey, right? Most of them traveled by the newly laid out railway infrastructures, right? The
Right.
travel between Bengal to Assam was much more easier because of the rail. The landscape was similar. the linguistic familiarity, everything was so familiar. And by this time, the Bengal's economic prosperity, particularly for amongst the farming community, was also
Hmm.
suffering from many kind of challenges. Historians who have done very, very good work on Bengal's agrarian economy, they have shown that the Bengal's the land reclamation process had almost come to a saturation by the end of the 19th century. There was also massive ecological degradation in the East Bengal, primarily because of weeds and other kind of uh, plants.
Right.
It was an ecological collapse, and combined with everything, the farmers there, mostly they were tenants of the zamindars of Bengal, right? They decided to move, right? They were lured by the opportunities given by the profits coming out of jute. It was almost free from any kind of peasant cultivations previously. It is a new crop which they have introduced, and
Right.
their numbers continue to increase in millions, right?
Now, let's try to move ahead a bit. I am also aware that we will have to, not run out of time towards the end of our discussion. So I want to. We have spoken about the initial part of human settlement from other parts of the region. The most important question, which in modern India people needs to understand, is this outsider insider conflict in Assam and in other parts of the region, but mainly about Assam. Is there people who are not very aware of when it started and when did this convert into a religion based conflict? When did the outsider become a Muslim, and when did two categories of outsiders also come? Like one became a Hindu refugee and the other became a Muslim infiltrator. That is the most common way of labeling of people coming from the same part, which is today's Bangladesh. If a Hindu comes from there, it's not that Hindus are coming in large numbers. In fact, in your book, you have said that from 1970s is the time, after that, we do not have the kind of migrations from today's Bangladesh as we are seeing. Possibly the last part was just as Bangladesh became independent. So I would like you to take us through this entire period and conversion of the outsider insider conflict, its emergence, and then the religion based conflict, because that has become central to national politics today.
Right. Okay. Let me summarize it.
Yeah.
You know, as these poor farmers, they began and settlements and started reclaiming land from the first decade of the 20th century. At least from the second decade of the 20th century, we can see the localized tensions, worries, anxieties began to be expressed,
Right.
right? At least from the 1915, 16 onward, one can notice that there was some kind of apprehensions that what is the outcome of it, right? And the opinions were clearly divided. As
Mhm.
sections of the local intelligentsia, local people, right, they thought that this is a welcome step because it is going to transform, the migration is going to transform the economic landscape, right?
Right.
Because there is no major laboring class for them. Many of them also thought that this will also help them to acquire new land. They can also become a big landlord, right? That those opportunities were there. But remember, these were really a very in a subtle way. Some sections of the populations obviously started articulating their formal apprehensions, right? That these are not welcome step. These are creating and challenging in terms of access and control of the local resources. Very few also express their cultural apprehensions. Outsiders are coming up. But
Mhm.
between 1910s and the 1930s, these were largely localized classes, but definitely
Okay.
produce some amount of conflicts amongst different religious and the ethnic communities. That was very much
Right.
clear. However, from the early 1940s, as
Right.
Muslim League, right, it began to uh, had a very formal, very
Becoming more stronger and stronger,
stronger. It
greater
had
support.
right. It controlled Assam, the legislative politics for a very significant period of time. This was the time, and when uh, sections of the followers of the Muslim League, right, or their leadership, by 1900 and early 40s, it formally began to visualize Assam as a part of future Pakistan. Then things began to really slipped out of this very formal narrative, right? Then
Right.
obviously there was a competitions between Congress, Muslim League, primary. They were the two primary political
Parties at
parties,
that time.
right? Apart from the communist and the others, right? Uh, then I think the entire narrative got slipped out of it, primarily because of competitions over power, resources, as well as also the future of these regions. Uh,
Right.
so one can see between 1942, 1942, 43, and 1947, dance competitions happening.
Right.
Uh, and this was the time one can then see very slowly outsiders versus insiders, and also taking a very clear.
But if I can interrupt, the outsiders at that time who are coming in through the 1940s, as the Muslim League is gaining ground and as the imminence of Pakistan becomes clear to people, these are essentially Hindus coming from districts of Bangla, of what is today's Bangladesh. Is my understanding correct that there
No,
is through the 1940s, they
no,
are the people coming?
no. You know,
No.
the most of the populations who moved
Hmm.
between 1900 to 1930s, right? They were largely the followers of Islam. Majority of them.
No,
I'm not
in
saying
the 1930 till the 1930s. Right.
1930s, right? In 1930, in 1929-30, there was a huge, because of the global economic depression, there was a collapse of the jute economy. And this essentially created some bottleneck for the further migrations. One can
Hmm.
see there was a decline of migration in the 1930s. However, the other parallel things also began to develop. By this time, Assam's economy also underwent
But
dramatic.
in the 1940s is the same religious profile of the outsiders.
You know, uh, we are talking two different things.
Huh.
The people who continue to move, right, in the 19, what I'm trying to emphasize and say that the massive migrations, right, of
Hmm.
really of a gigantic structures, it happened primarily between 1900 to 1930s, right?
Okay.
Since then, the flow and or the migrations of people will happen at different time, but conditioned not by the forces of global economy. It will be primarily because of the localized political developments or economic developments. That needs
Hmm.
to be very clear. You know, in the 1940s, the tensions began to flare up, and it moderately took a religious turn.
Hmm.
And the circumstances was also conditions by the larger context of partitions, and also the competitions between the Muslim League and the Congress. Many
Right.
things took place at this time. However, from the 1900 and the post-partition till the 1970s, I would say that migrations happened at different scale, and the responses of the Indian state was also very, very clear, right?
Okay.
I would say that migrations happen at three different moment.
Hmm.
I cannot assign any specific date between
Right.
1947 to 1970s, right?
70s. Yeah.
Three different moments. One which was largely an outcome of the partition, right?
Right.
And partitions obviously had fundamentally jeopardized our settlement patterns, and many things began to happen. And
Right.
this was the time when a significant number of the Hindus, right, poorer
Right.
Hindus, they moved in, right? small sections of the Muslims, they moved into the East Pakistan, but they also came back. But these were
Yeah.
largely border areas of that time. You want to ask me some question?
No, no, I said, that a small amount of Muslims also, I was
They moved out.
just,
They
yeah,
moved
they
out.
moved and then they came back
They came back.
because, as you write in your book, you say that because, land rights were different in what was
Right.
Pakistan at that point, not beneficial to them. So they found that they were losers, so they came back.
You know, I must mention it here for our viewers, right? The Assam had a riotary settlement in most of the area, except the bordering areas of Gwalpara
Right.
and the Kasar in the Parak, in the southern part of the province. Because of riotary, the farmers really found it as a very important legal and political right and social right. It is easier to cultivate, own a piece of land. I think that was an extraordinary sense of freedom that the riotary had given, riotary system, unlike that of the permanent or zamindari settlement. This
Right.
made the case absolutely clear at the choice for migration. Anyway, let's come back to the post 1947 to 1977.
Which was
So yeah, after
the
partition.
second, the after partition, what you're talking about.
Right.
First, you said about the Hindus coming from there. The second, some of the Muslims coming back
Yeah.
to Assam, and
Yes.
yeah,
Most of the Hindu who came from East Pakistan, they were not formally and primarily agriculturalists. Many of them are very poor retail farmers, right? Had no security of livelihood, right? For example, some of you would be given 2 rupees, 5 rupees, a small amount of
a very small
money from
amount.
the government to settle down and earn a new kind of livelihood, right? Anyway, so this was one. However, because the promised structural, economic, and the political transformations did not happen in East Pakistan in the 1950s and the 60s, right? And the economic conditions remain comparatively in almost like that of the colonial time. Right? The outflow of the people continued to happen during this period of time in the 50s and the 60s. One thing needs to be also very clear. Uh, the formal institutionalizations of regulation of flow of people through mechanisms like passport, visa, borders, uh, was also extremely rudimentary. It was not
Yes,
possible for these newly emergent nations at the time to put in place, right? It was really,
very
really
difficult to check people from coming.
right, complex and fuzzy border, right? One does not know where is my field and where is my drawing room, where are my keys.
Right.
It's a very fragile, delicate, and emotive situations. It's not easy for a historian, for any others, to comprehend that situations, right? And
Right.
also, it was a watery, muddy area. Even the borders, apparent borders, would be kept on shifting because of forces of nature, right? So it
Right.
was
Right.
extremely fragile situations. There's no hard boundary as such.
True.
However, as the people continue to move in, right from the Nehru's government and subsequently to the later time, right, between 1950s to the 1960s, in these 2 decades, there was intense pressure from the people of Assam that this is becoming an unbearable situations, right?
That you
And
have to stop migrants.
yes, and several steps were undertaken. Most of these steps initially in the 1950 with a kind of rudimentary legal steps that Assam can throw
No,
out
there was a
people.
immigration, immigrants expulsion from Assam Act. All those laws were there.
Right. This was largely an initial steps, but that act was not formally implemented because when its time came for its implementations, one can see that uh, this was implemented largely with a lot of cultural and other kind of biases, and Nehru instructed the Assam officials that this should not be undertaken aggressively and rigorously. However,
Right.
the process of migrations, the flow of people, because of the very rudimentary nature of the borders, who knows and why should people think about that situations, right? It's very, very fragile situations. People kept on moving from here and there, right? Uh, in the 1960s, it really turned out to be a very, very volatile political situations. And, and Assam's Congress politicians, they really insisted Nehru's government and subsequently Lal Bahadur Shastri and Mrs. Gandhi that steps must be undertaken. It was primarily
And that
towards
is
the,
what eventually led to the Assam movement.
I would say it will come much later, but it
Yeah,
was in the early 1960s, around the time of the Indo-China War, right?
right,
The Congress politicians, they really pressurized Nehru's government that steps must be undertaken to
right,
expel the people who had come recently. So some steps were undertaken. Several hundreds of thousands were people who were expelled from the regions under several legal mechanisms were put in
hmm,
place. One of them was called prevention of infiltration of Pakistan from
right,
of Pakistanis, right? So this actually created a very uneasy political and cultural situations. People were taken from one part of Assam, they were released into the border areas. However, it actually brought in the, mm, a serious political crisis for the Congress party. In
hmm,
1967, when there was election, the Congress had a very reduced vote share, and this was primarily because the Muslim community who suffered because of expulsions that were happening at the time, many of them actually decided to withdraw, back out, not to support the Muslim
not to support the Congress.
Congress party, right? Let me correct that. And the Muslims, for them, unlike the experience of 1930s and the 40s, they really did not have a charismatic, very powerful, and or maybe a liberal political leadership also. All
Right,
this really created a very crisis-ridden situations for Congress party as well as for the
right,
poor Muslims sections of the society, right, who mostly arrived in these regions between 1910 to the 1930s. Anyway, the migrations continued. It
yes.
was around this time in 1971, suddenly situations really turned a very, very volatile, and it really took a dramatic turn. Because of this war of Bangladesh, right?
Bangladesh war. That's right.
Bangladesh war,
And
right?
the independence of Bangladesh.
Bangladesh. I think the most important development was that of the sudden arrival of refugees numbering in millions in the
Right.
bordering
And they
states
were
of.
coming. They were coming because they were being persecuted by Pakistan army. Is that
Yes,
so?
absolutely. It was
Yeah.
huge prosecutions, the fear, atrocities, military atrocities that were
Yes.
unleashed in Pakistan in
It
this
happened
month.
across. In West Bengal. I think it was possibly even in larger numbers.
Right. Let me clarify this point. Anyway, this process began around the month of March and it continued till the month of October, right?
Hmm.
Several
In 19
millions,
in 1971.
1971, right? And it really was given a serious pressure, produced a serious pressure on the government of Mrs. Gandhi, right? And
Right.
Mrs. Gandhi actually personally visited several of those refugee camps. In fact, only a tiny number of refugees were in the refugee camps. Many of them also became part of the local families, their kins, right? They moved into our areas. The
Right.
three states of the eastern India, West Bengal, Assam, and Tripura, right?
Tripura. Yes.
They really became the substantial recipient of these refugees.
Of the
West Bengal,
Bengali speaking people were coming in.
right, right, and most of them were Hindus. Some
Right.
very tiny sections of the Muslims also
So
joined.
the question arises is that when did this, the fact is that people are coming from outside, and as you said, most of them are Hindus. So at which point does this and why does this sentiment against the people who are coming from outside, how does this get a religious profile?
Yes, let me make it very clear at this point.
Hmm.
As I said, the most of the refugees, this is now a politically, economically, structurally a different kind of migrations which happened in the 1971. P.N. Haskar, secretary, private
The
secretary,
Mrs. Gandhi.
Mrs. Gandhi, right? He personally estimated that close to 1,800 people kept on arriving in India per hour, right, during
Right.
those days, and really
It's, a,
worried Mrs.
it's an
Gandhi.
astronomical figure,
Yes,
1,800 people per hour.
astonishing figure. And I think because of this refugee crisis, Mrs. Gandhi was formally forced to join, apart from many other reasons. I'm not going into that. Uh,
Yes,
she had to join the war formally, right?
yes. That is what actually led, in some extent.
Many of Mrs. Gandhi's officials, bureaucrats, right? They made it very clear that this migration is going to make our the the situations worse for the Indian states, Bengal, Assam, and other areas, because it is such a huge in number. And in 1972, when Bangladesh was born, formally was accepted, and Sheikh Mujibur Rahman arrived in India for negotiations, further talks. Uh, both Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, then Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and Mrs. Gandhi, they formally made a joint announcement in the month of July 1972, and agreeing both this Prime Minister agreed that the people who came after March 1971 from East Pakistan, then Bangladesh, they would be formally taken back by the new government
Right.
in Bangladesh, by the new nations. But it was not an easy situation. Most of the people, they arrived here because of worries, military atrocities, and they had by this time they had merged with the larger
Local
local.
people here.
Yes, yes. And it
They
was a
have families here. That is
yes,
what had happened by that time.
both and large majority and significant majority of intelligentsia and others from Bengal, also from Assam, they also extended. They welcomed the formation of Bangladesh at that time. It was an
Right.
extraordinary political cultural crisis for South Asia at that time.
Right.
So, however, another crisis came in 1974.
In
74.
74.
Yeah, there was a almost famine-like situation in Bangladesh. Right, the
That's
new
right.
government failed to cope up with their political and economic crisis. Right,
So there was a fresh set of migrations.
migrations, and this was the time when these were both Hindus and also to some extent Muslims. Right, this is the time when the situation really became. Most of these um, refugees who arrived in 1974, what they immediately did. Uh, Now they had arrived with a new political mind, new political leaderships. They started claiming their electoral, the voting rights. Right, many
Right.
of them started acquiring their voting rights. They knew that they cannot go back to Bangladesh because of an
So
worsening.
democracy becomes a right. That
Right,
Bangladesh has also become a democracy, a practicing democracy. Elections have happened after 71, after independence. It is
right.
moving towards democracy, and
So
it is
this,
there.
yeah, 74, 75. I think this was a very critical time, right? And this was also a very important moment for the
So are you trying to say is that they're asking for voting rights? It actually made the people who are already staying here very nervous, feeling that they are going to get outnumbered, that their opinion will not matter in elections, and that is what possibly gave rise to, the initial Assam movement. The outsider versus insider.
let me make it very clear. I think that at this moment in 74, 75, especially 75, 76, 77, this entire emergency time, right?
Right,
Parallel development took place primarily in the Brahmaputra Valley. Brahmaputra Valley, because of its size, density of populations, everything, it was important for the entire
Hmm.
state, right? Uh, so Brahmaputra Valley, two major developments. One, around the time of emergency, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, because of her the famous 20-point agenda, right? What she insisted that the state government must undertake serious tenancy reforms, and this because of these
Serious?
tenancy
Okay.
reforms, right? The government of Assam from 1975 onward, they
Hmm.
undertook very rigorous legal and political steps to provide occupancy rights to the sharecroppers of Assam.
Okay. To the
Because
tenants.
to the tenants,
Right.
the sharecroppers, essentially the sharecroppers.
Right.
Though
Right.
Mrs. Gandhi's slogan was right is tenancy reforms, it was the sharecroppers, because many of
Okay.
very, let me explain this phenomenon. Throughout the 1940s, 50s, 60s, in Assam primarily, because there's a new class of the absentee landlords, right? Absentee landowners, they began to emerge, right? Many of them are
Right.
low Assamese populations, right? For them, cultivations or profit from land was the only source of income or additional income, right? It was There was no major industries, nothing was happening. So many of them thought that if they can acquire more agricultural land, it will add to their income general. So most of these the people, right, who helped in their cultivations, right? It was essentially on the basis of sharecropping.
Okay.
Sharecroppers, you will share the crop, which was a very complex economic agrarian practice, right? So most of the people who joined or who were essentially jute farmers earlier, right? Because jute was no more a lucrative crop, more people who came and joined the force of the migrants in the previous decades, in the 1950s, 60s, and the early 70s, right? They were essentially sharecroppers in Assam,
Okay.
primarily in the lower, in the western and the central parts of Assam, right?
Now,
New
I will, be, fast forwarding you a bit more because we are now, beginning to run out of time.
Right.
You talked about the crisis in 1974. Now, there is a certain time that you talk about in your books and in your writings that when virtually, we're not talking about small stray instances of migration, but these large scale migrations comes to a stop. That is in
Yes.
this 1970s, if I have understood correctly,
Yes, I think it's very clear that 75 would be the last
the
formal
cutoff point. After
cut.
that, there is no major migration happening.
You know, wha- as a historian, I also uh, need to understand that is
Yes.
statistics are not the formal apparatus to understand the flow of people. There may be other informal ways through which people will keep on moving and other things. However, given Assam's economic political situation, 75 would be the last when this huge batches of people would come within a very short period of time. People will keep on moving, but this would be at a much more slower speed, right? Much slower speed. And
So,
this will really, really thin out in the later two decades of the 20th century, no
so,
doubt.
so, as a, what you are saying, 1975 is the cutoff point, and after that, there isn't migration happening at that scale. So, as a
I
person
said,
who's,
let me clarify. It is in
yeah,
terms of the scale, in terms of the
yeah, in
scale.
terms of scale, we're not talking in terms of such large scale,
Right, right,
small stray migrations keep on happening. I'm not talking about,
right,
5, 10, 2, 3, I'm talking about it. Definitely, it's all relative. When we talk about human migration figures, we are talking about relative. So the
right.
peak levels are, come to an end in 75. We're not saying exactly 75, but that is how it actually happens.
Around that time.
So as a person who's essentially been engaged in political journalism, my takeaway is, and I'm not asking you a question, I'm just presenting you a postulation, My takeaway is that for the last 50 years, 25 years of the 20th century, the last 25 years of the 20th century, and the first 25 years of the 21st century, these last 50 years, we have essentially fought. We have actually built a certain politics of creating a fear of the other, of the Muslim infiltrator coming. You've had labels given. The Home Minister has called them termites. That's the kind of politics which has been waged and a political rhetoric been done, all to consolidate the vote of the core vote elsewhere in the country. That this is a government which is actually trying to prevent large scale demographic invasion of India. That is what is happening. So that is that without any actual continuing migration at that scale, we are continuing to fight our political battles, and we are building a rhetoric because of that. This is the most important takeaway that I get from your this thing. It has, of course, been extremely illuminating to speak to you and to understand that how migration has taken place not just in Assam but also in Bengal, which is today's West Bengal. Has in fact, you have written in your book that it has the largest share of the Bangladeshi migrants who have come. You also say that the bulk of Bangladeshi immigrant population in India, whether we like it or not, is actually Hindu, and that yes, Bangladeshi Muslims did come into India, but then their number is much less. I'd like to refer to and remind you of the 2019 NRC exercise, which left about 19 lakh people not in that list, and out of them, what only about 7 lakh were Muslim, the others were all Hindus, which claimed that, and that is what actually led to the NRC not being pursued so vigorously, because it actually left out the majority of the people left out were actually Hindus. So those are the key
I
takeaways that I find.
as a,
I would like you to have a last word from you before we conclude this discussion.
right. Thank you. I would not like to comment on the
No,
20th
definitely not. You're
century,
a
right?
historian.
Right.
You have your field area of expertise. We had agreed
I
that you will not be commenting on.
I would say that modern Assam is a product of many kind of social, economic, political forces,
Right.
and migration was one of the important force which shapes the transformations and the structural developments that had shaped Assam's economy in the colonial time. There was no doubt about it. The arrival of jute and the other economic the products of the time. It was essentially a product of the migrant workers in the 19th and the 20th century, right? So it was definitely at the heart of Assam's economic transformations that have happened, right?
Right.
The things after in the last quarter of the 20th century, it was a different story altogether. It was
A
full of
different story, yes, a different story, but a new kind of politics.
yes,
It started with that, and which we are still witnessing, and still we are witnessing the
we are
conflict
still
and
grappling
the
with.
attempts to mobilize
Yes,
political support.
I would
I
I
would
would
like to thank you at this point, because we've completely run out of time, and as you said about the heart of the matter, you really actually took us to the heart of the migration issue in Assam. I do not ever remember hearing such in-depth conversation about migration, explaining as to how we are fighting over a hollow or a non-existent issue. Thank you very much, Professor Arupjyoti Saikia. We could have spoken on for much longer. I only hope that we will continue to be doing so on a personal basis, but we should not continue to get a professional reason to come back and explain migration again, because this problem needs to be put to an end once and for all. I do not know whether it will happen or not. Thank
I'm
you
sure
very much once.
everyone. Thank you so much. I
Thank you.
appreciate.